The rattle of the gargantuan lids on top of the copper bowls could only mean one thing. The Great Banquet was coming. The shining plates were piled high along the center of the long, sturdy tables. They sparkled in the sunlight, despite the dust kicked in the house from folks going in and out during the warm day. Although the tablecloth had nothing to boast but a faded yellow floral print, it was clean and smooth, a welcome sight to all who entered. The little ones had dutifully set the silverware out, gleaming forks on the left, fancy knives on the right. Even though Billy had done all of his backwards, Big Sister carefully checked the table and corrected the work of his 4-year-old hands. She alone had the honor of setting out the glass goblets, polishing each one with her soft cotton rag to glittering perfection. She gently placed each goblet above the place settings, knowing the importance of every invited guest. The sweet smell of the feast had filled the house for hours, making large and small bellies grumble alike. The last straw was the final sizzle of bacon embellishments. The steam daring to escape from underneath the lids filled the hall with bounteous aromas, reaching out underneath the noses of the chosen invitees. Compared to the eagerness and exertion of the many chefs in the kitchen, the guests moved as slowly as molasses. Every pot, every platter, every gleaming porringer brimmed with mouth-watering delights. Each was prepared in anticipation to the invited guests' whims. No detail was left undone. Every aspect of the biggest feast the house had ever celebrated was coming to life. The master of the house looked on his diligent servants with warm favor. There was nothing they hadn't done to please him. He glided slowly around the dining hall, gently letting his hands rest on the back of each empty chair, sweetly saying a blessing over each invited guest. As the next avalanche of piping hot copper bowls came through the kitchen doors, the master smiled, knowing it was finally time. He dismissed his brightest and most beckoning servants in their camel hair vests to make the call. "Ladies and gentlemen, the great banquet is served." The guests, who had lolled about all day in the master's courtyard, suddenly buzzed like bees at the long-anticipated news. The direction they swarmed, however, was not to the master's liking. The town's respected marshal was the first to declare his rejection in a long line of refusals. As he stroked his large mustache down the sides of his face with his substantial hand, he demurely told the servant, "I'm sorry. I've just acquired land and I must go see it. Nothing could be of more importance. This is the way my family has always done it. Please excuse me." Other declines to the invitation were not so eloquent. The doc swayed back and forth, clutching onto the handrail of the porch to steady himself. His voice cracked as he claimed, "I spot 1, 2, 5 head of oxen. And I can't wait one more second before I gotta go see him. You understand the immediacy of my situation, don't you?" His glasses slid down the fat nub of his sweaty nose. He stumbled down the path and staggered into the arms of friends waiting for him just outside the gate. Many others followed in his wake. Although they had watched on all day as the savory meats and washed vegetables were delivered to the house, they made excuse after excuse, grieving the servants as to why they could partake in none of the great banquet. Mrs. Mallory offered the most dignified rejection of the celebration. The feather plumes on her plum hat quivered with excitement as she quietly turned her eyes up at the servants. She humbly spoke. "It's just that I can't possibly come. I'm on my way to my husband. We've just been married, and nothing, not the finest meal, not the warmest invitation, is going to slow me down." She stepped gingerly into the weathered stagecoach bound for danger, marked Overland Stage Line, and waved her dainty kerchief from her delicately gloved hand at the servants. They simply stood at shock at the deserted courtyard, their mouths empty of words to tell their master about the chosen guests who would not be coming to the great banquet. The heartbroken master had seen and heard all. With every excuse and refusal came a new part of the plan he had already set in motion, unbeknownst to the beloved servants. The master felt the warmth of his seething anger and the urgency of his tone. "Go into the alleys," he said firmly. "Go into the places of the unloved and uncared for. Invite the broken. Invite the disabled. Take special care to invite the blind and deaf. Invite the poorest of the poor who never had the good fortune to eat at a table with the tablecloth." The servants wasted no time in obeying the master, running into places of ill repute to find new guests for the great banquet. They recognized the fire burning in the reflection of their master's eyes and knew they must work quickly. The crowd, who knew they were unworthy, timidly crossed the threshold of the glittering dining hall at the servants' invitation. The notorious gamblers and horse thieves wondered, was it a trick? Could this warm welcome and all-encompassing joy be real? Some had to be helped in and placed on sturdy chairs. After years of begging from the floor, it was not a simple act to sit above the ground once again, able to look others in the eyes. Much to their surprise, the chefs brought out more food than they had ever seen. They felt the master's pleasure at their company. The welcome was genuine. Among the guests was an exhausted call girl, marched out of town earlier that day by the ladies of the Law and Order League. As she gratefully lifted the sparkling water goblet to her chapped lips and sipped the purest drink she had ever known, she cried in delight, "I shall never be thirsty again." The room erupted in jubilation. The tears shed were no longer in sorrow. They were in gratitude for the master. When it was discovered there was more room at the tables, the master sent the servants out on horseback down to the crossroads, beyond the city limits, beyond even the county line. There was no end to the master's desire to fill his house. The servants compelled strangers from faraway towns and foreign cities to come to the master's table. Anyone, no matter how filthy or scandalous, had a place at the master's table if they accepted the invitation. The master's mercy had a powerful way of transforming the lowliest horse thief into the most decent of gentlemen. A handful of the guests the master had originally chosen himself wandered close to the gate in front of the house. The music, the feast, the laughter that poured out from streams of light through the high windows was a mystery to them. The master looked at them from a high place on the balcony with tears in his eyes as they slowly turned away from the light. not one of them would get a taste of the great banquet.